So there are a lot of us on planet Earth today, right? Like too many, some would say. Anyway, it's about 770 crores or 7.7 billion people alive on this planet Earth today. There didn't used to be so many of us, of course, through history, and we weren't like this always spread out across every continent and every corner of the earth. We might remember some parts of human history and evolution that we have learned from school, like how the Homo sapiens evolved in Africa and all of that. But the timescales involved are too large, and the things that have happened are too many that it's not always easy to comprehend. So consider this analogy. If 10,000 years is equal to 1 year, the world that we live in, our house, is still very old. It's around 45,000 years old. All the plants and animals that we see around us, all the large plants and animals that we see around us came into being around 5,000 years ago. Our house got to the shape that we know today, meaning all the rooms are where they are. That is, all the continents reached their present positions around 2,000 years ago. Our species, the Homo sapiens, is 30-year-old, and we were born and spent our lives mostly in one room. For around 25 years of life, we spent our lives just in that room. We tried going outside a bunch of times, but either the path was too difficult, or maybe we didn't want to anyway, so we didn't make it like past a couple of meters outside, and then we had to come back. Eventually, when we were around 25 years old, some of us had started going out, either because we wanted to or because we had no choice, and we spread out over the whole house, killing a bunch of our cousins in the process, and maybe mating with some of them. 29 years of our life, we gathered our food, hunted what we could, and scavenged from what other large animals had killed and left for us. We started growing our own food around a year ago. All of the major regions in the world are just a few months old. Oh, and just in the last week, our population became like 7 times of what it was previously, and we've started this huge party and set our house on fire, and maybe we'll kill ourselves if we don't put it out in like 3 days. During a lot of the time that our species was confined to Africa, the climate was also quite different from what we are used to it today. We were in what is popularly known as an ice age, or more specifically, the last glacial maximum. Polar ice extended till about halfway through Europe, and all of Canada and parts of northern US was also covered in ice. And when you say covered in ice, you're talking about, like, at some cases 1 mile thick ice sheets. The climate was also probably quite erratic, thus not allowing settled agriculture. Around 50,000 years ago, we started spreading out of Africa and into the rest of the world. I'll link a video down from this great channel called Previous Eons, which kind of theorizes the different routes that humans would have taken when they moved out of Africa. Now, this is where something gets interesting. Because of the ice age, the way that the continents and our Earth itself looked was also different. So the amount of water on the Earth is a constant, right? It's mostly a constant, and water moves around the Earth in various forms, the water cycle. So if there was a lot more ice than there was today, there should all that water has to come from somewhere, and it mainly came from the oceans. So if the water level in the oceans is less, there would be a lot more land which is above sea level, right? And this is exactly what we see. So if you look at a reconstructed map of the world, like I showed at the beginning of this video, this was during the past ice age, and when we were spreading out of Africa, there was a lot more land above sea level. So if you look at India, for example, here I've shown how it must have looked like. Kerala was almost around double the size it was today, and one of the roads out of Africa is out of Arabia into India through the coast and out into Myanmar. Andaman Islands were also probably linked to the land at this point, so this might be how humans got there as well. Southeast Asia, which is a collection of islands now, used to be a huge landmass connected to the Asian mainland, and Japan too, for that matter. And if you come over to Europe, the United Kingdom was connected to mainland Europe with this patch of land which is now sunken, and it's called Doggerland. How do we know all of this? For the easiest way of checking this out, open up Google Earth if you have it, or Google Maps, and switch to satellite mode. All around the coast of India, you can see this light blue outline which runs around the whole subcontinent, including Sri Lanka. That crease you see, that line there, is the edge of the continental shelf, and the line from where the deep oceanic shelf of the Indian tectonic plate begins. And if you look at the mouth of the biggest rivers today, like the Indus or the Ganga, you can find these huge canyons which have been carved into the continental shelf. Of course, we can't be sure this is the path the river would have taken when there was more land, but it very well could have been. If you go towards Southeast Asia, you will see the seas around it being a lighter blue. That is the submerged continental area. It's been named Sundaland. Sundaland? Sundaland, I guess. And here's a picture of paleo river channels in the now submerged area. For another more zoomed in example closer to home, this is Mumbai today, but it is a city built through reclamation. This is how Mumbai used to look till about the 1700s, so that gives us a good idea of how it used to look throughout most of history. But all of the blue sea that you're looking at in between is not deep sea. These are quite shallow waters which are reclaimed easily, or at least it is not as difficult as building an island out in the sea. So if sea levels were 100 to 120 meters lower than what they are today, depending on the depth, most of Mumbai would have been dry land or even connected to the mainland. So we have some evidence of this also. When the British were excavating near the east side during the late 1800s to reclaim the docks, they found a lot of trees which are not decomposed completely. So this area, which is currently the Mumbai harbour, might have been a river valley of the river which is now emptying somewhere around Thane, but then it might have been emptying somewhere down southwest. It's quite funny, the city was whole, then sank, and then had to get reclaimed again. We find some of this in the Netherlands as well, which is famous to have reclaimed 30 to 40% of the country. But a lot of that area was land, and they just, really taking it back. But you know what the really weird part was? A green Sahara. Sahara is famously a big desert today, but most of it used to look like this, for example. We have evidence of this from cave drawings in caves within the Sahara desert, cave drawings which depict animals found in the interiors of Sahara back then. But we also know this from satellite imagery that has shown possible channels of rivers which had existed in the submerged land. And this was not just one long unbroken length of time when Sahara was green and it suddenly turned into a desert. It has gone through such cycles more than 200 times. Yes, all of this is nice and all, but why think about it? It's not really history, right? History is all the exciting stuff. Well, yes, technically it's not history, it's prehistory, but there's still a lot of useful information that we can get from studying or thinking about older hunter-gathering cultures. When we think of ancient history, we think about the great civilizations, right? Indus, Mesopotamia, Egypt. It's natural, they leave behind impressive structures and parts of material culture that we want to claim as a part of our heritage. When these civilizations die out, we are eager to know why, whether it was invaders or wars or climate change like the rains decreasing or something else. Settled agriculture and the surplus that comes with it, surplus meaning the amount of food that society as a whole produces so that every person does not have to be a farmer, seems like a very natural part of being us, of being a civilization. That part of our history when we started farming is commonly called the agricultural or Neolithic Revolution, like this aha moment when people got tired of hunting and just decided to settle down and start farming instead. We are Homo sapiens after all, the wise one. So starting farming and civilization seems like the wise thing to do. We are not really interested in reasons why civilizations start. Saying that we started farming seems good enough. We are only looking for reasons why they end. So why did we not take up farming earlier? If you remember, humans evolved roughly 250 to 300,000 years ago, and we have only been farming around 10,000 years out of that. Why did we not take up farming earlier if we are wise people? Short answer is, we don't have one single answer. Like many things in life, it's a complicated combination of reasons. For the first slightly controversial reason is that although humans evolved 250 to 300,000 years ago, we were only anatomically modern then, as in our bodies were almost the same as what they are today. But we are not behaviorally modern. That is, we did not have a few critical behavioral mental traits which facilitates the large-scale cooperation and abstract thinking which comes necessary in building farming civilizations. This is controversial, but it's somewhat, it seems somewhat believable, and it comes from the book Sapiens. And I'm not saying the author's name because I find it hard to pronounce. Yuval Noah Harari, right? Yes. So this is a theory from the book Sapiens. So why did we not start farming 50,000 years ago then? The last glacial period, or any glacial period which came before that, had very unsuitable and unstable climatic patterns, unsuitable and unstable for settled farming life, that is. It was either too cold and too harsh, or too dry and there was not enough rain, and the climate even varied very widely from time to time, even in the places where it did rain. So if you build up a farming settlement and if the climate in that region changed so drastically in the 50 years, you're not going to make it very far, right? Can we be absolutely sure that there are no farming villages or farming settlements older than 10,000 years old? No, we cannot be absolutely sure. But from the archaeological record currently, that is our best estimate. Farming civilizations started appearing in different parts of the earth 10,000 years ago. And for a very surprising reason, many human groups might not have wanted to settle down at all. Archaeologists who have studied the first farming societies have found out from the skeletons that the first farmers often had worse health. They were more unhealthy compared to hunter-gatherers. Sure, they may not have to worry constantly about getting killed by a wild animal, but they had worse teeth and bone health, and they had hours of back-breaking work compared to hunter-gatherers who had a more active lifestyle and who had more leisure time. And of course, one or two bad harvests or a drought left them very vulnerable as compared to hunter-gatherers who could just move on to a new location. So why choose farming at all? Why willingly surrender yourself and settle down for a life which gives you an inferior quality of life, and with the hope that things might get a few generations down the line? Popular answer, of course, is that humans are long-term strategists who could not stay away from farming once they saw its benefits. But we have hunter-gatherer cultures who were also long-term strategists. In the book, The Biggest Estate in the World, the author talks about how Australian outback as a whole was managed in very clever ways by Australian Aboriginal cultures who were mostly hunter-gatherers. For a possible reason as to why farming started in Egypt and Mesopotamia and Indus, we have to turn to our consistent and rather unpleasant friend, climate change. Remember the Green Sahara? If you look at the region today, you will see that the Nile is the only lifeline in the whole region, with settlements clustered around it. This is true today as it was 5,000 years ago, when the Egyptian city-states were getting started at around 3000 BC. However, during the time of the Green Sahara, the Nile would have been only one of many river and water systems present in the area, and human activity would have been nomadic and sometimes pastoralist, that is, herding animals throughout the whole region. However, we know that the Sahara started reverting to a dry phase almost right around this time. Bands of humans spread out in this region would have seen their lives and lifelines dry out and get drawn towards the only lifeline remaining, the Nile. This migration and the subsequent centralization of multiple small settlements into a bigger system is what gave us the wonders of ancient Egypt. We see the same thing happening near Indus as well. The Indus Valley civilization is said to have come into force roughly around 3500 BC, that is around 5,500 years ago. And we know from paleoclimatic studies, that is, studies of climate systems of the previous eras, that the Indian Ocean monsoon system, which was very strong from 9,000 to 6,000 years earlier, had slowly started weakening around this time. Of course, weakening is a relative term. We mean the rains would have decreased from something around 1.5 times what it is in present times to roughly what it is now. And when the rain started weakening, the cultures around that area which might have been nomadic and pastoralist and more hunter-gatherer alike would have switched to farming exclusively. Climate change, at least in part, would have led to the rise of these civilizations, not just their fall. So why does any of this matter? Most of us don't lead a life today where we have to go out and hunt for our own food or kill other tribes for our survival. Do I want such a life for myself, or think that it was somehow better for humans or for the planet or something? No, I like the life today with modern jobs and arts and music and fried chicken. But the numbers don't really lie. A lot of our history as a species was spent in just one continent. 85% of our history as a species was just spent in one continent, in Africa. And even after we got out, we spent 80% of that time following nearly the same way of life because the climate was too harsh to allow for settled agriculture. All of the prosperity that we see around us, the things that I mentioned, arts, music, fried chicken, all of it is built on the backs of hundreds of thousands of wanderers who had no idea that 200,000 years down the line, you and I would be here talking about them. That and a little bit of climatic good fortune, which over the past few decades we are increasingly destroying. So what do you do with this kind of information if you have not really thought about it? One optimistic way of looking at it, what I did is consider that Homo sapiens, us, really are a wise and intelligent species, and we work the best when we are in these kind of conditions, right? I mean, we certainly have accomplished far more in the past 10,000 years than we have in the 290,000 which came before that, and we have accomplished a lot more in the past 100 or 150 years than in the 9,850 which came before that. So maybe this large amount of time spent as hunter-gatherers was just a tiny blip in the tens or hundreds of thousands of years that we will have more as a species. So if there's a single takeaway from this video, let it be this. If we consider the long-run history of our species, an indigenous way of life, which you might have subconsciously considered uncivilized or unrefined, or even offensively called as Kartajadi or anything else, has been the single most successful strategy of surviving as a species on this earth. And the earth, as we know, throws a lot of surprises our way. Thank you. Hello everyone. Thank you for watching this video. First of all, let me apologize for the noise of the traffic and the general quality of the audio. This is the best place where I could sit with enough light and also show off that I have a bookshelf. This is a series that I had wanted to start for a very long time. In general, changing perspectives for a lot of narratives that we take for granted. So if you like this, please be sure to share and subscribe, and there'll be a lot more coming your way.